Since the release of Apex Predators a year ago, people have been asking for the F-15 every update, and it's finally here. But does it live up to the hype? Before I get into the F-15 review, I want to answer a question that I've been seeing all throughout last year. Why did we get the F-16 before the F-15? The US didn't mess up and number their jets wrong. The F-15 did come out before the F-16. But the reason why we got the F-16 first is because of the Russians, specifically the MiG-25. Unveiled in 1967 during the middle of the Cold War, the MiG-25 was hyped up by Russian propaganda to be the ultimate jet in the sky. They said that it could fly faster and higher than anything else and that it could beat any American jet out there. At the time, America was still flying F-4s and F-5s. The F-14 wouldn't have its first flight until the end of 1970 and wouldn't be introduced into service for another 4 years after that. And the Americans were scared. The F-14 that they were currently working on could beat the Russian MiG-23, but was it good enough to deal with this new threat? In late 1968, the US started work on a jet that could beat everything that Russian propaganda said that the MiG-25 was. The requirements for this new jet were that it had to be a single-seat, twin-engine fighter capable of reaching Mach 2.5 with a thrust-to-weight ratio of 1 when fully loaded. It only took a year for the Air Force to select the McDonnell Douglas prototype to be the base for this new jet. A few years later, in 1972, the first flight of a completed F-15 would take place. The jet was everything that the Americans could ask for, but there was one problem. In 1972, it cost $7.8 million to produce an F-15. That's equal to $56 million in today's money. And that was just too much for the US government of the time. So they wanted a plane that was lighter, smaller, maybe only had one engine. It didn't have to be as fast or as good as the F-15, but it still had to be good enough. And that's where we got the F-16. Which, funny enough, as a plane that was meant to be a cheaper alternative to the F-15, it still cost $6.8 million to produce an F-16 in 1974. It only costs $33 million to build one today, which is less than a third of the current cost of an F-35. So that's why we got the F-16 and Warthunder first. It was made to be a cheaper, not as good replacement of the F-15. I know that was kind of a long-winded intro, so let's get into this review for the F-15 and Warthunder. 3 versions of the F-15 were introduced in Update Air Superiority. The Americans got the regular old F-15A. The Israelis received the F-15A BawZ, which is an F-15 with added Python 3 missiles. And the Japanese received the F-15J, which has different engines that are about 7% weaker than the A. And they got a new AAM-3 missile, which is an AIM-9M with 40 Gs of pull instead of 30. For this review, I used the American F-15A, a rank 8, 12.3 battle rating fighter located after the F-4E in the tech tree. Across 117 matches, I had an abysmal 36% win rate with a pretty bad KD ratio of 0.9. I wouldn't really put too much weight into those stats though, as it turns out, since the update and during the time that I played those 117 matches, both AIM-7Ms and AIM-9Ms weren't working properly, and both were only fixed the other day as of the time of writing this. As always, starting at the back and moving up, the F-15A has a pair of Pratt & Whitney F100 PW100 engines that produce a max thrust of 6,140 kilos with a max thrust of 8,510 kilos when you turn on the afterburner. Currently, these are the second worst engines on an American jet in rank 8, only beating out the F-14A. I would pay attention to these engines. I think that they're going to be quite the star of a bit of controversy when players start doing some Googling and finding out that they're missing about 20% of their power. On the deck, you're only able to go about Mach 1.15, and you're really only able to go faster as you start burning fuel. Going up, the plane doesn't quite reach that 1-to-1 thrust-to-weight ratio that it should have, but once you're up at 30,000 feet, you are able to reach Mach 2.2 before you start slowing your acceleration, which is a bit off of the Mach 2.5 that we know the first F-15s were capable of. Moving on, the F-15A can carry 34 minutes of internal fuel, and it's the first jet to have not 1, not 2, but 3 external fuel tanks. Each external fuel tank carries an additional 11 minutes and 50 seconds of fuel. Personally, I never found the need to carry more than 1 external fuel tank. When using the afterburner, you burn fuel at 5 times the normal rate, so with 1 external fuel tank, you still get a bit over 9 minutes of total afterburner time, and that's plenty for me. Also, I found that doing maneuvers with the external fuel tanks on the wings was the only way that I was able to rip the wings, which was a big problem on the dev server, but that's been fixed for now. At the midpoint of the plane, the F-15 uses the same 20mm M61A1 cannon that all other top-tier American jets use. This time it comes packed with 940 rounds, which is about 30% more than any other jet around it. Ammo only has 40mm max pin, so I would skip the armored target belts and just stick with the ones for air targets. Passing by the pilot, he has access to all of the ballistic computers that you would want. The RWR is effectively the same as what we've been using on the F-16 for the last year, and the same goes for the radar as well, even though technically it's an earlier model of the radar than what we see on the F-16s. Moving on to weapons, the F-15 is not lacking. Stock, the plane carries 2 AIM-9Ls, which is then upgraded to 4. Next, you'll unlock AIM-7M Sparrows, which go on dedicated hardpoints under the fuselage. And finally, you'll unlock AIM-9Ms. Regardless of what secondary armaments you take, you'll always be able to carry 4 IR missiles and 4 radar missiles. If you haven't used AIM-9Ms or AIM-7Ms, I'll give you a quick rundown. Both are the pinnacle of American weaponry in Warthunder right now. Both have smokeless motors, which sadly doesn't matter in Air RB. The AIM-9Ms are the only American IR missile to have IRCCM right now, which stands for Infrared Countermeasures, which basically means that they beat flares. At least if you use them correctly. Fire the AIM-9M from behind the target plane and they're going to have a hard time dodging it. In all other aspects, the AIM-9M is basically the same as an AIM-9L. AIM-7Ms are just a continuation of your standard radar missile. The AIM-7M and the F-15's radar is a deadly combination as long as you fire the missile inside of its maximum range. Moving on to secondary armaments, you have your choice of the previously talked about fuel tanks, 18 500-pound bombs, 9 ensign bombs, 3 2,000-pound bombs, or 3 GBU-8s. Personally, I just took the 3 2,000-pounders to take a base in Air RB, but I take the GBUs instead if I were to take this plane to ground matches. You're also able to carry 240 countermeasures regardless of what you take, so you'll have plenty to spread around. For as bad as my stats show, I never felt that weak with the F-15. Sure, the engine should be about 20% more powerful, and the AIM-9Ms and AIM-7Ms were bugged when I was using it, but even with all that, I still felt like not only could I keep up with everybody, but like I was better than most of the planes that I was facing. I just did my best to stay away from jets with helmet aiming. Just wait until the F-15C releases an upcoming update with AMRAAMs instead of Sparrows. Also be glad that F-15s don't get helmet aiming until much later. Well, that's it for my review of the F-15A. If you have any questions about the plane, then leave it in the comments. If you like this review, then leave a like. The next vehicle review that I'm working on for Update Air Superiority has a distinctive screech to it. I'll let you speculate what vehicle that could be. I hope you all have a great rest of your day.